Trying to support people on the street is really difficult. People are not in the same place. Their life is really disordered.
Yeah.
They're worried about surviving the night. They don't want to talk to us about housing or anything else. They want to get through the night and make sure they survive. While housing first has been, I think, misrepresented sometimes, it really should be called housing with support. And that support can be everything from how do we help you with your untreated mental illness? How do we get you into substance use treatment if that's what you need? But it's as simple sometimes as how do we help you to sign up for food stamps and find the local food pantry? How do we help you go back to work? If you're older and you're not going to go back to work, how about we find you a volunteer opportunity so you can get back in the community? So it really does run the gamut, but housing first is not kind of a free pass on stabilizing, right? It's a means to an end.
What is up, Impact Heroes? Welcome back to the show. I'm your host, Rick Ornelas. Thank you for spending some time with us today because we know time's a valuable resource and we're going to make it worth your while. I appreciate each and every one of you, not just for listening, but for who you are. I know you're sparking change to make the world a better place every day, and I am humbled and grateful for your efforts. It takes all of us doing our part to spread positive change. And that's what this show is all about. Motivating you with stories of struggle, courage, and hope to empower you to make a difference in your life and the lives of others.
In case you missed it.
Something that we think about with technology, I think we tend to think about solutions, right? Like we could be talking about a solar powered pump system in a community and how
Yeah.
that's actually bringing clean water. We actually use technology to build empathy because one of the challenges with operating in a space where people are living such different experiences is figuring out how to build connection between you, who might be living over here and living one very distinct reality, and how you build empathy with communities that look very different from.
Available everywhere you listen to your podcasts.
Welcome back, Impact Heroes. Today we have the pleasure of speaking to our latest iSpark Chain social impact hero, and she is an interesting one indeed. Our guest today has a keen understanding of the complex causes of homelessness and proven methods to solve it. That'd be fantastic. She's the head of New England's leading organization dedicated to ending homelessness. She has a multi-year track of being selected as one of the top 100 women business leaders in Massachusetts by the Commonwealth Institute in partnership with the Boston Globe. Boston Magazine named her one of the 100 most influential Bostonians, and she has received the Massachusetts Council of Human Services CEO Award of Excellence for her leadership. She's also received numerous awards, including the Henry L. Shattuck City Champion Award, the Greater Boston Chamber of Commerce Pinnacle Award, the New England Women's Leadership Award, and the University of Vermont's 2020 Alumni Association Award. That's a lot of awards. She was also named the most innovative person in the Massachusetts nonprofit sector by the Boston Globe. She's a frequently requested speaker who regularly serves as a policy advisor at the city, state, and federal levels. I'm sure they can all use some of her expertise. And she served on the Mayor's Advisory Council on homelessness, and was a member of the task force that helped shape the City of Boston's action plan to end veteran and chronic homelessness. That's wonderful too. She also serves on a number of policy committees to the state's Executive Office of Health and Human Services. It sounds like everybody wants to know her thoughts. So this self-starter is confident, independent, and truly passionate about her work. So please welcome the authentic, driven, empowering, and amazing President and Executive Director of Pine Street Inn, Lyndia Downie. Lyndia, welcome to the iSpark Change podcast.
Welcome. Thank you. Happy to be here.
Yeah, it's fantastic. So I was looking forward to our conversation, because this is a topic that people don't always think of, right? They'll think of it when they see someone maybe on the street and they, maybe wonder why, or how did they end up there? Or, they don't always think top of mind. And your work spans, many years in terms of, how you've, helped, at least in Boston. So I have to ask the question where we start with all our guests. And we see you as someone that is spreading positive change, someone whose actions have a positive impact on others and humanity, and therefore is making the world a better place. So the question I have for you, Lyndia, is do you see yourself? So by our definition, you're a social impact hero. Do you see yourself as a hero?
Not really. I mean, I'm doing my job. The heroes in this sector, not just in Boston, but I think across the country, are the people working every day on the street, in shelters, in supportive housing, working hard to support people and their homelessness and keep them out of homelessness. But really, the credit goes to the staff. I'm very fortunate to have an amazing board that is really willing to go along with vision and work hard on helping us execute on that vision. But yeah, it's tough work. It's hard work, and it is work that is you have to stay at it. You have to be nimble because things change, and you have to keep it in mind that there's a bigger picture here.
Yeah, exactly. And I commend you for, saying that all the others, all your team, that they're the true heroes. I see them as heroes as well. So just so you know, just by virtue of the work that they're doing, they're heroes because all of us have the ability to be an impactful hero every day with doing things like they do in terms of working to support others. So how did you get involved? Obviously, the organization has a long history. How did you get involved and when and what really got you on that path of working with them and championing that cause?
So I was born in Scotland. My family came here. We moved to Connecticut. My father's brother was already there, and I grew up in a small town in Connecticut, Old Saybrook, and I went to the University of Vermont. And I had planned to go to law school. I had applied to law school, and I had moved to Boston for no reason other than my college roommate had moved to Boston, and I had a place to live. Literally, she needed a roommate. No big plan there. And I applied to law school and was waiting to hear where I got in. And a friend of a friend had volunteered at the Pine Street Inn and told me they were looking for temporary help through the winter. And I thought, this is great. I'll hear about law school in the spring. I'll go in the fall. I'll go work there for 6 months. So I applied for a 6 month job helping out with volunteer food groups and organizing clothing donations and things like that. And I went in for my interview with I don't even think I had a dress. I had a borrowed a dress from my roommate, rode my bike down. I had one pair of, nice shoes, and when I got there, I sat in what was the shelter lobby for about 45 minutes. I thought they forgot all about me. And I learned later that that was one of the tricks, as it were, to see if people really if the environment felt okay for people, if it didn't feel
Ooh,
intimidating. And, you know,
interesting.
in my short 45 minutes there, I happened to be able to talk to a couple of guests who were sitting in the lobby and chatting with people. And it was the beginning, I think, of me falling in love with the mission and the guests. But that's how I ended up there. And after 6 months, the woman who hired me said, there's another job opening up, and are you interested? And I applied for that, and then really have done a multitude of different things there. I've been executive director now for about 20 years.
Wow. So when was that first interview? How many years
Well,
ago was
that was a
that?
long time ago. That was almost 40 years ago.
Wow.
Yeah.
So I thank you for including the part of how they purposely had you wait a little bit to interact with others around you, the guests, and see what was going on, get a visual and kind of experience that. Do you remember, Lindia, do you remember that they had a lot of people that either they started and then they didn't come back as volunteers, or they realized it wasn't the right work for them?
It happens where some people, it's not a fit. I would say it's rare, honestly, partially because once you start doing this work, you do start to realize that homeless folks are like the rest of us. And while there's lots of stereotypes out there, some of which are accurate, many of which are not, you really do start to understand that people are struggling and they just want the same thing everybody else has had the fortune to have. They want a decent place to live. They want to be safe, right? They want to get on with their lives. And On occasion, we might have someone say, "Gee, this work is too hard," or it's shelter can be chaotic. Our shelters are one of our shelters. Two of our shelters are fairly large, but for the most part, I would say no. And even that first morning I was there, I happened to talk to a guest. His name was John. He was an older guy, and we just started talking. I said hello, and we ended up being reading buddies. He was a voracious reader, and I'd bring in books I'd finish, and I'd ask him, what are you reading now? And if we got books donated, I'd say to him, there's stuff coming in today. He was someone who had had a really tough life, and he had worked most of his life. He had started drinking later in life and ended up at Pine Street. He was still in touch with his family, and when he was sober, would go back and stay with his brother, but he couldn't always manage that. But you know, he 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 couldn't have been a nicer, more gracious person, and I think I was really lucky to meet him and to hear his story, and from my very first days at the inn.
Yeah, that's a fantastic story because I think it makes people realize the human side, which it's easy to. Well, I don't know if easy is the right word, but it can happen for those that they have a home, they have all the comforts that they're used to, and so to see someone in a situation that doesn't, that it seems so foreign, so far away from where they are in their life. And you said something that's very important, is that all of us humans, we have the same basic needs, right? We all just want the same things. And so when you peel back those layers, then you realize, okay, well, at our core, we're all the same. And so to treat someone with respect and dignity and all the things that we all deserve, then I think that not only is fantastic for the individual that you're doing that towards, but I think also for the person that's doing it, there's a lot more reward in that, seeing past whatever the exterior may look like.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head. I think that for many people, they can't understand how people end up homeless, but when you're homeless, you can't sometimes understand how you ended up homeless either. That, life, things took over, one thing happened, and you couldn't recover from that one thing, something else happened. And if you're living so much on the very edge, it only takes three or four things for you to tip over. So many times, guests will come in and say, I don't know how I ended up here. I did the right things, or I just sometimes we wish we could have talked to people, a year before they came to us, because sometimes people don't know their rights. Sometimes they get evicted and don't have legal counsel. There's a lot of reasons why people walk in the front door of shelter.
Yeah. So that brings up an interesting question for me, because I know you have a bunch of programs. I know you support over 2,000 individuals each day, and that number may be maybe even greater now. And so I know you do a lot. Are there any programs to preventative type programs? So in that instance that you just described, where that person's like, hey, that one thing happened that is putting them on a path that can lead to homelessness, are there any type of programs that you do in that area?
So we have a small program that really it's really a kind of front door problem solving program, and we do it really two ways. One is people show up and say, "Look, I need shelter for the night." And we have a handful of staff who will basically sit with them and say, "Is shelter what you really need? Tell us what's going on."
Hmm.
And it's not everybody. It's a small number of people that we can prevent from coming in. So we both do it in person and we do it on the phone. A lot of the phone work is saying to folks, listen, before you come into shelter, let us give you some other resources. Here's how to apply for housing. Here's some short-term rental assistance you can apply for. Try that. If nothing else works, we will work really hard to find you a shelter bed. But I think one of the stereotypes out there is that everybody who's homeless looks like the person standing on the corner who's talking to themselves, right? And while that
Right.
is true that there is a group of homeless people that have major disabilities, major mental illness, serious substance use struggles and disorders. That's in Boston, that's about 20% of our population. Everyone else really runs the gamut from people who just can't afford rents in a very expensive city to folks who had a pretty bad turn, to folks who were doubled up and that situation fell apart. So, there's really a broad set of reasons, but the stereotype is actually the minority,
Yeah.
ironically. For a lot
Yeah.
of other people, while we can't on the phone and in person prevent everybody from coming in, because the majority of folks by the time they get to us, they're homeless, they don't have other options. But I'm
Hmm.
thinking about this young fellow when we first started this program who showed up and had been living in a roommate situation and was delivering pizzas on a bike, and somebody backed into the bike, had a basket on the back of the bike and did local pizza delivery. He had a daytime job and this was his second job. It was the only way he could afford rent in Boston was having two jobs. Somebody backed into the bike, and the the pizza house he worked for said, "We're not buying you a new bike. That's on you." And he basically said to us, "Look, if I can get another bike, I can find another apartment. I've got a daytime job. You just help me." We bought him a bike with a custom basket. I don't know, it was $1,500 or something.
Yeah.
He was gone within 2 months, right? Saved his money from his day job, had enough money to get back into a situation with another roommate. There's not a lot of those simple things, but some of them really are simple. Some of them are literally about transportation. I'm stranded in Boston. I'm originally from Springfield. I've got family there. Can you get me back there? Those are easy ones.
Hmm.
The more complicated ones are where there's a family reunification and we're trying to do maybe some mediation with a family member to say, hey, shelter may be what you think this person needs, but could we work with you on something else? And could we kind of work to get some agreements around what this person will do? But in an expensive city like Boston, most of the time, by the time we see folks, they've run out of options.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I thank you for explaining that and putting some clarity. I know we've talked about a lot on this program. We've talked a lot about mental health awareness and mental health issues. You mentioned 20%, that people have. What what about the mental health component? Because is that a large part, is that a big part of that 20%, or is that in another bucket, or what really? Because you know I know me personally, I've had family members that have had mental health issues, and one that, for a very short time, just a few days, ended up on the street. And so that's something that I know for that's something that it's not really something that is their fault, if that makes sense, right? It's not like something that they, or unfortunate incident like the bike, for example, but it's not, hey, I made some bad choices, I made some this, I made some that, right? It's just so what about those folks that you help, and how does that play a role?
So I think the mental health piece is probably one of the most challenging part of our work. And about half of the folks we see who are long-term homeless have a what I would call a serious mental health diagnosis, right? Serious and persistent mental health, schizophrenia, serious bipolar, and most of them I would say are untreated. And so we are trying in some cases to get those folks into housing where we can get them stable and help them with treatment if they're willing to go. And over time, we have some success with that. And then the other thing we're trying to do on a regular basis is get people into the treatment system. And that is challenging. There's not enough capacity. Oftentimes, people need longer term treatment and monitoring around medication. Once people are housed, it's a lot easier to do that than if you're on the street or even if you're in shelter. But it's
Mhm.
a very, I think, systemic failure in this country that we do not have better mental health treatment and that we have so many mentally ill people who are out on the street. And,
Yeah.
I say this sometimes. We had a woman who slept at our biggest transit hub, South Station, which is where our biggest train station is in Boston. Her name was Pat. She was in her late 70s. She was legally blind and she slept upstairs. She had untreated schizophrenia. We finally, through our outreach van, convinced her to come into shelter. But when I think about someone like Pat who couldn't see very well, had untreated schizophrenia, trying to manage the mental health system, show up, get treatment, go to an appointment, follow up, go and get your meds filled, take them every day. It's impossible for people to do that under the system we have. And
Yeah.
so what we end up doing is trying to piece some of that back together for people, but it's extraordinarily difficult. And oftentimes, when people have mental illness, there are, and my friend Pat's a good example. She had all kinds of medical things going on too that it was really hard to convince her to even go to our clinic and get help for some of the medical issues that were going on with her. So it's multi-pronged, and that is one where we really do need a much better system for helping people access care and housing when they're mentally ill.
Yeah, and the hope is that it seems like you have some good support in the work that you're doing, and so the hope would be that that continues, and you're able to continue adding programs and different things to help those type of individuals, and really everybody, really all of the individuals, the guests that come across. So talk about the because I know from what I could see in doing some research, there's been a lot of growth over the years. I'm sure you've seen a ton in the 40 years. So what would you say has been the biggest, I don't know, the biggest change in your time in
Mm.
terms of how you can support the homeless, and stem the problem, and how has that
Yeah,
evolved over the years?
yeah, it's a great question. When I first came to Pine Street, most of what we were doing was shelter, right? We could get you shelter, we could get you clothing and a meal. We had a nursing clinic, so we could get you some health care. But, leaving aside the healthcare, which was fabulous, a lot of the services were very basic, right? And we didn't really, a lot of people found housing on their own or were able to reconnect with family and friends, but there was a group that we could never get housed because of their disability level. And basically, everybody got almost the same thing, right? You came in, we gave you a bed, and we had a very minimal case management staff. And if you needed some help with something else, we could try and direct you elsewhere into treatment, possibly, maybe connect you with mental health services. But it was not robust. Let me put it that way. Probably the biggest change I've seen is the fact that we now have data. It's not perfect data, but the
Mhm.
early days, I think, of looking at who was stuck in homelessness, who was homeless, getting at that stereotype of, the that 20% group that's really a much smaller group, and trying to figure out how do you really line up the kind of support people need at every level. For some people who come and stay with us for a few weeks, they need something very different than someone who's homeless with untreated schizophrenia, for example. And so the data really allowed us to move our services into focusing on that group that no one else was serving. And that really today and was and still is that group that is long-term homeless. There's really not what I would call enough housing with support services in the certainly not in the market, but even on the public housing side and the subsidized housing side. There's subsidized housing, but these folks are going to need a level of support in order to hold on to that housing. And so I think there was really two pieces of data. Dennis Culhane at University of Pennsylvania was doing a lot of research, early, really groundbreaking research, looking at that group and the kind of resources they were using. They were showing up in the ERs. They were getting inpatient at a much higher rate than other people. And Dennis was able to come back and say, look, the cost differential here, you could solve this problem with the same money, basically, right? You could get people housed. If you house them, they'll stop using emergency services. They won't be in the emergency room, 6 times a month. They won't be inpatient either on the psychiatric or on the medical side. And at that same time, Sam Tambaris, who's a psychologist, was working at Bellevue, New York, and really starting to get this idea about housing first into, I think, into the field. And I think really looking at that data and saying, look, if we house these folks and if we make it easier for them to access housing, how do we then support them once they're in housing? Because
Mhm.
trying to support people on the street is really difficult. People are not in the same place. Their life is really disordered.
Yeah.
They're worried about surviving the night. They don't want to talk to us about housing or anything else. They want to get through the night and make sure they survive. And especially, in the wintertime, it's a challenging conversation. People are worried about other things. So I think the data really did change how we looked at things. And while housing first has been, I think misrepresented sometimes. It really should be called housing with support. And that support can be everything from how do we help you with your untreated mental illness? How do we get you into substance use treatment if that's what you need? But it's as simple sometimes as how do we help you to sign up for food stamps and find the local food pantry? How do we help you go back to work? If you're older and you're not going to go back to work, how about we find you a volunteer opportunity so you can get back in the community? So it really does run the gamut, but housing first is not kind of a free pass on stabilizing, right?
Mhm.
It's a means to an end.
Yeah, and I'm glad you shared everything that you did because it goes back to my preventative question, right? It's really about, hey, it's one thing to, have shelter and okay, that's great for that night, that immediate need, but how do we get to the deeper root of, the issue and look for solutions and ways to prevent and, and like you said, transition people and get them on their feet and that's where my brain always goes. My brain always goes to, all right, there's a lot more to it, right? There's a lot more to it
Mhm,
than just that. It's
mhm.
kind of that first principle thinking. And so I know you guys have done a lot over the years and will continue to do so. And hopefully there's more, you're able to do more of that, right? With the proper funding and everything, you're able to do more of that. So one thing I've noticed for a lot of organizations, that I've spoken to is that there's those two components that sometimes can be a challenge. The funding and
Mhm.
then the people that are doing everything. So how have you been supported in terms of those two areas, right? In terms of, just people that are generous, to help support you, and then also the staff you have and what that looks like.
We're lucky to be in Massachusetts and to be in Boston. We've had great leadership at the state level, both to support shelters and to support housing with support, right? So we've just passed a bond bill in Massachusetts that has a framework around supportive housing. So I think there has been Massachusetts is one of the few states in the country that has its own housing voucher and rental assistance, which is really phenomenal. But we've also been very lucky to have support from a succession of mayors. Really, we've worked with, at this point, I think 5 different mayors who really
Jeez.
have understood this. Well, they've understood the issue and they
Yeah.
have been out front in supporting it, both from a funding standpoint, but also on the housing side from a zoning standpoint. We're a city that's very heavily driven by the mayor's office, and uh, the mayors have been supportive on zoning, which is really difficult when you're trying to cite this kind of housing. I think the second thing I would say is that Pine Street has been fortunate, and we would not be able to do what we do, especially some of the newer innovative things and some of the pilots without private support. So, we've got probably about 20,000 donors who support us, everyone
Wow.
from, foundations who, help us really think through strategy and sometimes trying things on the strategic side that maybe public dollars wouldn't pay for. But, we've got donors who send us $25 every year, and we're grateful for that. It helps us keep the place open. It helps us with the food and all of the outreach work and the housing work. So I think we've been blessed with that kind of support, and it has, we really are a very kind of a public private partnership because we use both the public dollars that are available, but we also are heavily reliant on donations, uh, on the cash side, but even on the food side and some of the in-kind work that we do.
Yeah, it sounds like there is a ton of support. How about the people side? So
Yeah.
do most is it reliant on volunteers or is that you have a big staff to help you throughout the different
Yeah.
shelters and everything?
So we have a good sized staff. We have right now we're running about 600 folks every night on the shelter side. We have a catering company that employs homeless and formerly homeless people. That's a small social enterprise. And then we have 1,100 units of housing where we're responsible for support services and in some cases property management on that housing. So we're big, right? We're
Hmm.
working with, a couple thousand people every day. And then we have 2 vans that do street outreach at night and a daytime street team. So we've got about 550 full-time staff. So
Oh, it's a lot.
I would say, right, staff first. What I would say though is, the Pine Streets, our food program was started by volunteers, by a woman who was a high school a high school teacher who came on the board, and she taught at a Catholic high school out in Framingham, Mass. Her name was Kay Whalen O'Halloran, and she started really organizing food groups, parishes and churches and business groups to come in and bring food and feed people. And so at this point, I would say every meal in all but one of our shelters is provided by volunteers. And on a given
Wow.
night, you know, depending on which shelter you're in, it's at least a few hundred meals that either you're helping us with financially, or maybe you're making dessert and bringing in the bread, and our staff are cooking with the with and you the parish or the business is paying for the meal. But those volunteers, it's our biggest volunteer program. We could not do it without them. They're part of
Yeah.
they're part of our village, and they're part of the day-to-day work that goes on. I mean, they show up in all year long. They show up in horrible weather, and they take it really seriously. I think the benefit to that is not just the hands-on work and literally adding, hours and hours of labor that we don't have, but it's also the idea that this is not a scary place. You can come in and meet homeless people and talk to homeless people. You can, our trainees and our social enterprise work alongside the volunteers, and we hope it breaks down some of those stereotypes around, who you're working with and who homeless people are.
Yeah, there's so many moving parts and so many aspects to what you do that it takes a lot, kudos to you because it takes, and your leaders, because it takes fantastic leadership to coordinate everything and to just make the engine go, so to speak, to make everything move. So I want to transition a little bit, Lindia, to spark moments, because we talk about that on every show, and these are moments in life where our actions or the actions of another have that ripple effect that maybe you see, maybe you don't, but it all starts with that spark moment. It all starts with that initial act that leads to something great down the road. And I'm sure you could probably tell me hundreds of stories with the guests that you've had. Share one. You've already have actually shared some, but share one that stands out in terms of a spark moment, or even someone that impacted you.
Yeah.
That's appropriate.
So, I tell this story because it was for, I think, me and for some of our other staff kind of a revelation and uh-oh, have we, what have we been doing wrong moment. When Housing First was becoming out there in the field and people were talking about it, we had Sam Tamberas come in and talk to our board. And, at the time we had some Pine Street founders. We still have one founder on our board, Monsignor Frank Kelly, and the board was very skeptical. Staff were skeptical, and the board was very skeptical, which is why I asked Sam to come in. And we had a really robust back and forth on it. And it was really, this is everything from we should try this to this is never going to work. And about a month after that meeting, we had bought a very small building with the help of a longtime board member. A small apartment building about a block away from our shelter, not even half a block away. And I called the head of the Boston Department of Mental Health at the time and said, "Listen, we've got a handful of men that we have been trying to house together,
Mhm.
the Department of Mental Health and us.
Yeah.
They're sleeping on our floor. They're sleeping outside. Nothing we do works. They're not going to be people that could ever be possibly committed or sectioned, but they're really struggling. They're having health issues. They're ending up, in hospital beds for health issues, and we've got nothing for these guys. We've tried everything. We've tried housing, and without support didn't work. We've tried getting
Mm.
them into mental health system, and just completely by chance, they had some unspent money at the department, and the fellow who was there said, "Look, we've got some unspent money. We'll call this a pilot, and if you buy the building and renovate it, we will work with you to get the longest term stayers that have mental health diagnosis in your shelter into this building." And so we bought the building, we started fixing it up, and I got a call one night. It was a Sunday night. It was about 9 o'clock, and getting a call on a Sunday night at 9 o'clock is usually never a good thing. It's
Yeah.
it's usually not a things are going well call. It's usually
Yeah.
uh-oh, what happened call.
Yeah. Yeah.
And one of the staff on our 3 to 11 shift said, "Listen, Sam, who was one of our longest term guests, he had been homeless for about 20 years. I'm mortified to tell you, about 20 years. And everything we tried never worked. He had untreated schizophrenia. He was lovely, and there was times he could actively engaged, but other times he was very delusional. And we had tried everything, transitional programs, housing, and he kept coming back. And he did stay out sometimes. Most of the time he came into shelter, but he showed up about 2 o'clock in the morning and he slept on the floor on newspaper every morning.
Hmm.
And I always would get a kick out of it because there'd be a note in our log saying, Sam needs a late admit from a new staff person, when the truth is Sam came in at 2 o'clock every night. And
Yeah.
Sam's version of why he couldn't get in to get a bed on time was that he was in charge of a telescope in Marblehead, Mass, which is north of the city, and the train from Marblehead was late every night. That was the story, and it was fascinating because there is no train from Marblehead, by the way. There's been
Yeah.
a train probably since 1930. But anyways, lovely guy, and we desperately wanted to help him because he was getting a little bit older, life was getting complicated, he was getting some medical issues, and it was really challenging. I mean, we couldn't even get Sam to take a shower, literally.
Yeah.
So, anyways, I get this call Sunday night. It's late, and staff person says, "Listen, Sam, we told Sam about the new building, and he wants to go over and check it out." And I say, "Great, take him over." They take him over to the building, and I kid you not, we had just finished painting it. I mean, we had the beds in. I don't even think we had a coffee pot. And they take Sam over, and he goes up to the top floor, and he says, "Oh, I like this." And while they're over there, the staff calls me back and says he wants to move in tonight. And I think, "Really? We don't have any staff. We barely have anything." And I said, "Well, what do you think?" And staff say, "Well, look, we're willing to check on them. Let's try it. Nothing else has worked." So Sam comes over with all his many bags and newspapers, and he takes the room on the top floor. Staff get him, a pillow and some blankets. And I say, "Well, make sure you check on him." They go over middle of the night. He answers through the door, "I'm fine." They go over in the morning, and there's no answer. And they have to take the lock off the door. And I think, "Oh my God, what have we done?" And Sam's sleeping on the floor on newspaper the way he did in the lobby, and they wake him up and say, "Sam, we've been banging on the door for 10 minutes." And he says, "Listen, I haven't had good night's sleep in 20 years. I've slept with one eye opened. I've been so afraid on the street and even in shelter." And he said, "I cannot believe that this is my room and I get to stay here and I get to I
Hmm.
had a good night's sleep." And Sam lived out his life there really until he passed, and it changed everything for him. There was no requirement around medication or filling out an application or doing the things that Sam couldn't manage to do. He moved in, he started, making his own coffee and his own breakfast. He started showering. He started getting help with his medical care. He never went on medication, but he told us, had we been listening, he told us what he needed, which was a decent place to live where he felt safe and some help
Yeah.
with things that he couldn't manage on his own. And it was for me the kind of click that Housing First could work, and that if it could work for someone like Sam, we could make this work for other people. But he was my guru, and he was an enormous classical music fan. And after he had been in there for about a year, he said to me, "You should come up and see my room." And I went up to see his room. And of course, we had constant struggles with the clutter and things, but he had the most extensive collection of classical music I think I've ever seen, CDs, and knew every classical musical station across the
Wow.
across the country. And that was his downtime. He sold newspapers, continued to do that even after he moved in. He sold newspapers on the street corner, and he made some cash that way. When I think about the life he had, sleeping on our floor and showing up at 2 a.m. and getting maybe a couple of hours of sleep a night, and how much everything changed. So that really for me was a big aha. And I went back to staff and said, "So, what have we learned? And frankly, what have we missed that we should have been
Hmm.
saying to Sam, what is it you need? Not what do we think you need? That's not the question. The question is, what do you need? And can we help you with it?"
Well, that's a beautiful example of a spark moment, Lindy. I really appreciate you sharing that, and I know our audience will appreciate that as much as I did. So thank you so much. So before we get to our final question here, how can our listeners learn more about the work you're doing with Pine Street? Learn, see how if they can support you. I mean, any ways that they want to connect.
Yeah, feel free to go on the website. It's www.pinestreetin.org. I've got a website with our services, some stories about some of our guests and our tenants. So would love to have people support and would love to hear from other people that are working in homelessness that are doing something innovative where we're, you know, constantly looking to find out how do we get better and how do we innovate and how do we think differently about what we're doing.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we will make sure that we put all that in the show notes and everyone will have access. So, one final question here before we go, because our goal at iSpark Change is to positively impact 1 billion people within 5 years of launching our upcoming social impact social media platform. Now, we know we can't do it alone. We know we need the help of impactful leaders like you to show others the way, because a lot of people feel, as I once did, that they're too small to make a difference. So we value your thoughts and opinions as a social impact hero, Lyndia. So I want you to peer into the future and tell us, what can the world become if everyone starts believing that they can help one another and support one another in the way that you have at Pine Street?
I think we would then have a world where homelessness is minimized. Let me say that so much of this issue in particular is about humans reaching out to each other and being kind and giving people the benefit of the doubt and really helping them rebuild the pieces that they've lost and knit things back together. Everybody can have a role in that. You can be a donor. You can reach out to a homeless person in your community. You can support what your parish or synagogue or your business is doing. I think the other thing that people do not think about is, when someone wants to build affordable housing in your city, your town, don't say no. Learn about it. Show up to the meetings. One voice in a meeting that's a positive voice for housing can make an enormous difference. Two voices, 10 voices, that really makes a difference. Write to your local electeds and say, look, I support housing. We've got a housing crisis in this country. I want to be part of the solution. Don't automatically say no to it. I think we've got, 1,100 units of housing now in Boston, and the sky has not fallen in. People are doing well and living there and getting on with their life. So I think those are a couple of things that I would say that people can do.
Yeah. And what I hear and what you're saying, thank you for sharing that. What I hear what you're saying is just get involved, right? Just do something. Just don't
Absolutely.
ignore the problem. Just don't sit on your hands and figure it's someone else's responsibility. So thank you for taking time to share your heart and wisdom with our audience today, Lyndia. You came in and you over-delivered, as I knew you would. Your desire to be impactful is evident, and you're filled with passion, determination, and you lead with a heart of service and gratitude, which tells me you will continue to have success at Pine Street and in all facets of life. And this is only the beginning of your time as a social impact hero.
Thank you.
All right, Impact Heroes, that's our stories that connect us all, and we loved hearing Lyndia's today. Lyndia Downie, you're not only an inspiring and amazing human being, you truly are an iSpark Change social impact hero. We'll see you all next time.
Do you want Rick to speak at your event? Here's what others have to say.
Did not know his story, and it was so inspirational, and his presence on stage, his authenticity was just incredible.
Performance made me feel some type of way. My name is Craig Siegel.
If you're looking for a speaker for your next event, hire Rick. I promise you this, you will not be disappointed.
Visit rickcornelis.com to book him today.
Remember, Impact Heroes, every positive action can be a spark moment that has a ripple effect that spreads far beyond the initial act. So go out there and spark change. Don't forget, if you enjoyed this episode, then please smash that 5-star rating on iTunes or Spotify and leave a review. We value your comments and we want to hear from you in the community. Thank you for listening. God bless you, and we'll see you next week on the iSpark Change podcast.